One of the most common interviewing techniques is the deep dive. This happens when the interviewer is asking you a number of follow-up and challenge questions in a bid to understand, to get a sense as to your level of expertise and whether you are who you say you are. What's the best way that you prepare for a deep dive during a job interview? First, I believe the most efficient way to ensure that you're going to do well during a deep dive would be to brain dump your best stories. What do I mean by brain dumping your stories? I simply mean to spend the time and write everything you can remember about the key highlights in your professional career, even write down 2 or 3 pages for your major achievements, so you ensure that you will remember all the key details. In many cases, your best stories will not be the most recent ones, and therefore, it makes sense for you to spend the time to make these brain dumps in a bid to be well prepared, so to speak, for your job interview. The second thing you can do to maximize your chances of success during a deep dive would be to predict and prepare the follow-up and challenge questions in advance. And here I'd like to share with you something that's called the STAR worksheet with the most commonly asked follow-up and challenge questions by the situation and task, action and results. If you take into account preparing these, for at least for your key highlights, for your best stories, you minimize chances of getting surprised during a job interview. Also, you could use this STAR worksheet to give better, more convincing answers during your job interview. The third thing, and probably the most important and interesting for everyone, would be to understand where do candidates fail these deep dives. What does it mean to fail a deep dive during a job interview? The most common scenario for this would be when candidates cannot remember some key details, that you haven't done your homework, you haven't done those brain dumps, and maybe something happened more than 10 years ago, so it can only be natural that you don't remember some key details. And this may not come across as you think it would to interviewers, because there's always a trust issue in these job interviews, and if you cannot remember something that's key to your achievement, that might raise suspicion with respect to your ownership of that story. Are you who you say you are? These sort of things. The second reason why a candidate would fail a deep dive would be to talk about the decision which they cannot defend as their own. So what happens here is that in job interviews, many candidates try to sell themselves on being more important than they actually are in the context of some of their achievements. So using a deep dive, using those follow-up and challenge questions, interviewers might get a sense of whether you did what you say you did during that story, right? The third scenario of someone failing a deep dive would be when the interviewer is testing you on whether you're a hands-on or a hands-off type of role. So in other words, they are testing the seniority of the role you had during that achievement. Why is this important? Well, the classic example of hands-on versus hands-off PM. If they're screening for a hands-off PM, that is someone extremely senior, and you give them a deep dive of a hands-on PM, it doesn't mean they will disqualify you, but that might signal you're rather hands-on when compared to a hands-off type of PM. What can you do about this? Preparing these things in advance does help you to the extent that you understand what to listen to during these job interviews. So your best defense here would be to try to inquire as much as possible as to what type of role you're applying for during these job interviews, because oftentimes the job description might not advertise the seniority, the true seniority of the role that you're applying for. So you inquiring, exploring, asking everyone around, hey, what's the ideal candidate? What are some metrics of success for the ideal candidate? will help you to do well during a deep dive, again, when they're listening for hands-on versus hands-off. The fourth scenario where candidates fail a deep dive during job interviews is what I call the unexpected deep dives. Most common example of this would be candidates willing to sell themselves and bluffing during your tell me about yourself, your elevator pitch. Basically, you mentioned some fancy metric you didn't fully own, your interviewer becomes suspicious, and then they deep dive. They deep proof that metric for the remainder of that interview. It does happen, these are true stories, and it's not as exceptional as most candidates think. And the fifth scenario of why someone would fail a deep dive during a job interview would be the backbone test. The backbone test used to be more common. Nowadays, I'm not hearing as much of people getting this backbone test, but essentially what they're looking for is whether you are someone who may be too agreeable, either during your job interview or to agree for the sake of social cohesion. Two examples here. First, let's say you're during a job interview working marketing, you had to design an ad and you said, I predicted that a green background for our ad would work best. And then your interviewer says, okay, but my favorite color is blue. To which you'd answer something on lines of, well, we could have made it blue. It would have been fine too, maybe, right? So that would be you signaling that you are too agreeable during the job. In the second example, in a case of a conflict with your boss, you said you estimated the delivery timeline for an application to be 3 months, and your boss said, no, it has to be 1 month. And you said, hey, in order to keep everyone happy, we said 2 months would be the sweet spot. Okay, so again, you are agreeing for the sake of social cohesion, not based on elements. You're not talking about how you bring the data to your boss that, hey, boss, it's not possible in 1 month, but it's possible in 2 months. You said no, because 1 plus 3 over 2, the average in between is 2 months. We decided, so this is the backbone test in these job interviews. So long story short, it's well worth taking these deep dives seriously. They're extremely common interviewing techniques. Of course, some role play would also help you to get a sense as to how you would perform in these situations. I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.